Hello and welcome to the second of our videos about voices for the language of bells. This time, Emily talks about the use of language in vocal music. We hear from our composer Jill Jarman on how she goes about writing for voices. And I talk about the sound of bells and how that relates to singing.
When you think of vocal music, you probably think of songs and other pieces that have words, which of course is exactly what most vocal music is. It's one of the luxuries we have as singers that we get to present great text and beautiful language using the vehicle of the melodies and harmonies and rhythms that make up music. We're lucky that we have this extra element to help us communicate, to tell a story or present a character or just deliver a poignant message. And now, although it is a luxury to have words to sing, in another way it can feel like a curse just because of the technical difficulties that singing text can present. For example, a smooth legato line is much trickier to achieve if the text is full of words with lots of consonants. And likewise, high notes are harder to sing if there are lots of words, especially on certain vowels. So we have to find ways of singing all these consonants without interrupting the line too much, and to modify our vowels in the extremes of our range. Once we've done that, we can move on to then finding meaning in our sound. We get to sing in many different languages, especially in classical music, and through this we get to explore all the variety of sounds and wonderful words that each language has to offer. In order to sing with real understanding and to convey an honest interpretation of the text, we have to do our homework and study the different words and sounds in each language to get it right. It takes work, not just to get the sounds right, but also to develop a good grasp of how the language functions and how we can make the most of its expressive potential. Throughout the history of music, there's been a debate about which is more important in singing, the text or the music. In some styles, it's very clearly all about the text, and the music can be very repetitive, sometimes not even that interesting. Some examples of this are hymns or folk songs, where even when the music is very beautiful and expressive, it's clearly more about getting through lots of text. Other times, the words really seem to take a back seat and are less evident, and the music itself takes over. This often happens in styles that use melisma, which is when a long series of notes is sung on just one syllable, like in some opera arias or polyphonic masses. Then sometimes it's hard to even keep track of what specific words are being sung, and the music instead has to relay the mood of the text. Try this. Next time you're listening to someone singing, whatever the style, whether it's a pop song or a choral work or an opera aria, pay attention to whether the words are prominent and being delivered clearly and directly, or whether the voice is being used a bit more like an instrument. You can probably find examples of both in most styles at different moments. Of course, there are times when we don't have any text to work with at all, and later in the video, Bertie will explain a bit more about how the voice functions as an instrument. But first, to relate all of this to our project, The Language of Bells, let's hear from our composer Jill Jarman explaining how she thinks about writing for voices and how singing can be really expressive even without words.
Hi everyone, I'm Jill and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about voices. All animals have a voice. Mammals have a voice, birds certainly have voices, even insects have voices, even if it's rubbing those hind legs together. But they probably all do, they're just outside the frequency of our hearing, because the human hearing is maybe that big out of a spectrum that big. So before language, we still used our voices. It's not as if there were no words so we couldn't utter a sound. So I love this phrase give voice to. You give voice to something, and we all have absolute intrinsic understanding of the meaning of a sound, even though there's no words. So we can recognise distress, happiness, or fun. So for example, we all know of the baby crying in a restaurant. We know that it's just bored or testing out its voice. We sort of intrinsically know it's not hugely distressed. And for all of us who've had animals, cats or dogs, you know the difference between an excited yelp to see you and an absolute yelp of pain. So I'm really interested as a composer in this idea of not using any text, and it's something that's kept me interested a long time. You can really explore the sound and the meaning of that sound, and getting the meaning out of a sound without text speaks to the elemental and the powerful and the primitive. So what about using voices as instruments? What do we have to be careful with? Well, the obvious ones. There's limits such as range, how high or how low, the timbre of the voice and what does it sound like, is it brittle, is it harsh, is it mellow, and then the breath. So these limits can actually be really useful. For example, the breath creates a natural phrase to any music that you're doing. And types of sounds of the voices create certain atmosphere as well. The other really interesting thing about voices is that we're very connected to them. I know this sounds very strange, but if you think of this instrument here beside me, the piano, for me to play this, the thought has to go from my brain, some musical idea has to form, it has to come down here, down my arm, into my hand then has to put it on the piano and it has to press the piano to play that. Now we do that as musicians lightning fast, but arguably there's nothing so fast as that thought to a voice. It is immediate, therefore it's powerful, it's true. So there's plenty to explore in this piece, and I'm really looking forward to the journey with you and with all the singers.
There are lots of reasons, as we've just heard from Jill, why voices are an intrinsic part of our project. Partly, as Emily mentioned earlier, we can use the storytelling potential of text to develop the themes of our programme. And also we can compare and contrast the sounds of language and the sounds of bells. So would we go so far as to say that bells can speak? Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement. You owe me 5 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey. When I grow rich, say the bells of Shoreditch. This rather whimsical nursery rhyme suggests bells conducting a negotiation across the streets of old London, and we do refer to church bells calling us to prayer. We can also speak like bells. We can chime into a conversation, and we can let out a peal of laughter. Perhaps those metaphors say quite a lot about how versatile our voices can be. We can imitate other sounds, we can vary our timbre or sound quality quite a lot, and of course the most obvious thing that we can vary is our pitch, how high or low the sound can be. In contrast, a bell does not vary its pitch, and so in order to play a melody you need a set of bells. So a bell has fixed tuning, but even when you listen closely it's quite hard to pin down what note a bell is sounding. There are a number of different possibilities that present themselves within the overall sound picture of the bell. There's the hum tone, which is the lowest sound you might be able to hear. This is a low E, which is the hum tone of the Erfurt bell in Thuringia in central Germany. And here's its strike tone, an E above it. And then the other partial sounds that you can hear are the G above that, and then the B, and then the E above that, and then quite a sharp major third, a G sharp, probably sharper than this keyboard, and then a B at the top. So it's a very strange spectrum, quite reminiscent of our normal harmonic spectrum. Vocal sound is produced very differently from the sound of a bell. Instead of striking, it's the passage of the air itself past the vocal folds that creates the vibration, rather like in some wind instruments, the double reed wind instruments. When the clapper hits the bell, the whole bell vibrates, and when the air goes past the vocal folds, the whole vocal tract vibrates all the way to the lips, past and over the top of your tongue. When we speak, and at an even more advanced level when we sing, we do something with our voices that does relate to how the bell's sound behaves, because we have the ability to enhance the high ringing components of our sounds or the lower boomier ones. The high ringing components of our sounds or the lower boomier ones. It's not as obvious with voices as it is with the bell, because the partial tones of the bell form a relatively rough pattern, which I think makes the individual sounds a little bit easier to hear. Changing the shape of the mouth and the throat enable us not only to create colour within the words that we are speaking or singing, but also to create the vowel sounds in those words in the first place. Certain vowels have combinations that are quite dark and boomy, oo for example. Certain vowels like E have combinations that are relatively ringy. If I go from a W to an A and back to a W, wow, it goes dark, brightish, dark again, roughly speaking. If I do that on an NG, you can probably hear the harmonics go by a little bit. I'm going to sing it. That's what I'm aiming for. That's a pretty odd exercise, and I don't think I would ask my singing pupils to isolate harmonics in that way, but it is interesting to hear. I have been asked to make similar sounds in vocal music, in modern vocal music of the mid-late 20th century and beyond, and enjoy doing that, but I'm going to leave it up to Jill Jarman to see what she comes up with in terms of vocal sound for the composition which she is preparing for us, and which we're very excited to find out about. When I'm teaching singing, quite often I do find myself using the language of bells, asking for ringier tones or glowier tones, and so it's been very interesting to explore the similarities between bell sounds and vocal sounds, and I hope you've found it interesting. In our next video we'll be talking about vocal style and what we do in rehearsal, which is often about matching our individual vocal colours and blending them together. We hope you'll join us again for that.